Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I am Trish White, the Family Education Manager at CHAD and the moderator throughout this presentation. Parent to Parent is an evidence-informed educational program provided by parents to parents. This educational webinar series for adults with ADHD who have children with ADHD is sponsored by Takeda Pharmaceutical Company. You will be provided with a brief presentation followed by the opportunity to ask our presenter your questions. You may submit your questions by typing them into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also download the handouts in the control panel. If you have trouble downloading them, a link will be provided in the email with the recording that will be automatically sent out 24 hours after the webinar. This educational series includes 1-hour-long webinars that cover a variety of topics that are important for you to learn about. They include Recognizing and Overcoming the Barriers, which was previously recorded, and I will include the link in the email. Today's session, which is Define and Overcome the Challenges. Then Strategies and Treatment Options that help with everyday parenting challenges, which will be on October 10th. And then Setting Realistic Goals, which will be on November 15th. And Communication and Interpersonal Skills to Resolve Conflict with Your Child, which has yet to be scheduled. Philadelphia will be our host for this year's biggest conference on ADHD. This conference will not only feed your mind, but also your soul as you meet other kindred spirits. We have top-notch speakers and authors sharing their wisdom, but you will also benefit from all those conversations with fellow attendees sitting next to you, waiting in the coffee line, and wandering the exhibit hall. Now through Friday the 13th at 5 p.m. Eastern, we will be offering a special promotional rate for webinar attendees. You can get the discounted rate of $280 for the general session by using the promo code YouAndYourChild19. CHAD was founded in 1987, and it is the premier nonprofit where those with ADHD and others who care about them can get unbiased, fact-based information about ADHD. CHAD produces educational materials, including Attention Magazine, and organizes in-person and online educational trainings and events. The National Resource Center on ADHD is the CDC-funded national clearinghouse for evidence-based information about ADHD. Please visit our website to learn more about the benefits of becoming a member of CHAD's ADHD community of parents, adults with ADHD, educators, and professionals, and visit the events calendar to register for upcoming trainings like this one. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Caroline McGuire, who will now introduce herself and start the presentation. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline McGuire, and I am so excited to be here. I actually will start with a little bit of information about the fact that I have been to the International Conference on ADHD since basically the early 2000s. So I want to just say that it is a tremendous experience. All right, so I'm excited to be here. I have been in my ADHD journey for a very long time, and I'm more than happy to discuss it with all of you. So I'm going to start with this picture. So this is actually a client of mine, and I kind of thought it exemplified what happens and how we all experience things. So this is an actual mudroom closet area. And one of my clients sent it to me, and she was talking about how she feels such shame. And so I took a picture of a messy area in my house and sent it back so she would not feel shame. My name is Caroline McGuire, as I mentioned. I am a mother with ADHD. I have 2 children. My daughter is also diagnosed with ADHD. She's now 11. She was diagnosed when she was 6. When she was diagnosed, she was super proud. She grew up in an environment where I was a former Hollowell Center coach, and I was doing a master's degree. I had done a master's degree in executive function, and you know, she was very used to these very enlightened conversations and that there's no shame. And so I didn't tell her not to tell anybody, and she went to school and she told everybody. And I got phone calls, and I love to tell the story because what I did was I called the school back and I said, you didn't call me when she couldn't read, and we were worried she was dyslexic, but you're calling me now to say what? That she's proud. And I explained to her that there's stigma, but she says that it's the brain, there's science, there's pictures, and she continues to be sort of very proud. So that's where she is. I worked for the Hollowell Center for a number of years, and I did a lot of inventing and specialization around social skills, and then went out on my own. I got a master's in education and executive function, meaning the hub or the management system of the brain, from Lesley University in Boston. And all of this helped to form an education program I have to certify coaches. It's the only one in the world with International Coach Federation certification to give people more coaches, because there are not enough of us who work with families. And when I say I work with families, what I mean is I work with everybody: mom, dad, kids, teenagers, anyone who needs to get help. And I have a book coming out this September 24th called Why Will No One Play With Me? It's a guide to help any child, any parent coach their child through ADHD challenges in a way, but it's really about any child who's left out and any child who is experiencing social skills challenges can use this book. It was formed in the crucible of the clients I have with ADHD and level 1 autism, but it is actually for any child. So there's no diagnosis, there's no mention of diagnosis in it, because there's people who are shy who don't have friends. So we want to give them that opportunity. The big thing that I want to say today is that I kind of live the life, right? So I am in a situation where my whole family is experiencing the ADHD challenges that may be challenging you. And so I'm, someone who completely understands, empathizes. I'm not somebody who thinks that this is something that's easy. I completely understand that it is not. So that's the perspective I'm coming from. All right, and so this is the cover of Why Will No One Play With Me? You can go to my website, CarolineMcGuireAuthor.com, and you can get that guide. It's comprehensive, and it talks about everything you need to know, as well as provide scripts and, how do you start the conversation? How do you talk about tough stuff? And you can use those conversations for anything. If your child is, not wanting to get extra help and you have to have tough conversations with them, this is something that you could lift out of the book, even if they don't have social skills challenges. So the common situations that create problems for those of us with ADHD have to do with the chaos and the stress that parents are under nowadays. One thing I've done research on is that, two parents are working, there's more single parent households. The hours people are working at their jobs have increased tremendously. Commutes have increased, and parent responsibilities have increased. And so one of the things that causes this sort of perfect storm for us as parents with ADHD is that there's a lot of details to follow up on. I have an entire email account dedicated to all the emails the schools are sending, and you could spend all your time going through and figuring out all these nuances. A lot of these tasks require good planning and executive function. And by executive function, I mean the management system of the brain that allows us to plan, prioritize, pay attention, self-regulate, all the things that challenge us. All the myriad household requirements, right? So we don't just have to schlep people to sports and go to a job. We have to also manage the house, food shopping, sports equipment, lunches. And, one of the things that has been proven, and if you've taken any of the CHAD parent to parent courses, I'll never forget this, is that a lot of, when we have children with ADHD, there is much more required in terms of supporting that child, but also managing these multiple emails from teachers, tutors, coaches, and it affects us. It affects our job, it affects our livelihood. So it's really it's a key aspect of this that I want to stress. One of the things I always say to parents is, if you are raising a child with ADHD, you have certain things that are more challenging, and you need to cut yourself some slack and allow yourself that space to do whatever you need to do in order to manage things. And maybe your friends don't live that way, that's fine. Because, my big example is that I will never buy a head of lettuce, because what happens with a head of lettuce in my house is that it dies in the drawer. No one ever chops it up. No one ever washes it. I live next to a farm stand. It's criminal. But if I buy lettuce that's already in one of those bags, I use it. So that's just my example of, I'm sure some people are like, why are you buying bags of lettuce? You know why? Because it's better. It gets used. And that's the kind of mindset I think we have to adopt. One of the things that is really challenging for those of us with ADHD goes back to the executive functions, and that is future thinking. And future thinking is all driven by the executive functions and by a skill called metacognition. So metacognition is to take a bird's eye view of a situation, to have a realistic assessment of your skills and abilities. So, our kids don't always have realistic assessments. To take information from past learnings and incorporate it in your future thinking. And one of the things that Barkley is saying here is, if you have no sense of the future, if you have no sense of time, then you're not going to make a choice. You're not necessarily thinking about self-regulation because you didn't know there was a need for it. So you're not necessarily failing to self-regulate on an issue or failing to complete a task because you maybe didn't even think about the fact that in the future this task or this situation will be necessary. And those of us who are parenting with ADHD, we're trying to struggle and manage that sense of future and that sense of time in ourselves, and then in our loved ones and those living in our family. So that's a huge component here, and you can learn future thinking. It is absolutely something that can be taught. So I want to say that because I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and I definitely think it's something that could improve all of our lives. Future thinking is driven by this piece of the brain in nonverbal and verbal working memory. So that means your ability to hold information is working memory, your ability to manipulate information. And nonverbal working memory is the images you see in your head, and verbal working memory is your self-talk, right? So when you think about the future, there's something that we often do, and we talk about it a lot in sports, and it's called mimetic ideational information processing. And what that really means is visualizing yourself in the future, right? So you do a little mind mime, you do a little pre-rehearsal in your mind. Do you ever do this where you look at the future and you think, okay, I want to attend this webinar, but here's what I have to do before the webinar. Okay, I need to make sure that my dog's put away, that my daughter's on her homework, that the people who are putting a closet in my basement, know that I'm going up there. I put a little sign on the door saying that, don't ring the bell, and I have to think about all that. So what happens with many of us is that we just don't pause to pay attention to this. But every human being has this capacity to have this reflection and see yourself, a little movie in your mind, actually doing a task in the future. And you might do that, and you might find that your child does not. Well, one of the reasons as ADHD kids, we go upstairs to get our socks, and we come back down and we don't have our socks, and everybody wonders, why didn't you get the socks? Is that a lot of times kids don't do this mind mime function. Sarah Ward is an executive function coach, and she talks a lot about this and has some great tools. And so one of the things I always ask kids is, when you think about the future, do you do this? And a lot of times they do it for sports, or they do it for an area of interest, or they do it for video games, but they don't do it in daily life. So that's great. Now we know they can do it, and we can stress to them the importance, and to ourselves. Part of this is realizing and thinking about the future and training yourself to. And part of it is just pausing to picture that future self engaged in this task. And the impact of that is so profound, because you will have the ability then, instead of things sort of come crashing down upon you, you would have the ability to picture what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. I'm going to pack the lunches. I'm going to complete my to-do list. I'm going to clean up the kitchen. And I picture myself, a little movie in my mind, doing all of this stuff, which means that not as much as a surprise, right? Because I've done this pre-rehearsal and I've adjusted my timeline, right? I've adjusted my picture to say, okay, well, how long will that take and what will it look like? So this is just a little snippet about this. And like I've mentioned, there's many presentations about this that you can attend, and you can really build this piece, but it's essential. And one of the reasons our kids are not grabbing their socks, grabbing their soccer equipment, forgetting their computer, and you have to drive it to school, is because they're not doing this mind mime. It also, by the way, affects social. So if you think about it, you need to go into the cafeteria, you need to think about who you'll sit with, what you'll say, how to join in a group. And that's something that a lot of kids struggle with because they have not done that mind mime. So it's called mimetic ideational information processing. It's pre-planning, simulating events, doing a mental dress rehearsal. I call it the movie in your mind. It's this mental trial and error, right? So you're doing this acting out of scenarios, but in your head. And you can actually experience the emotions based on this future simulation. You can get stressed, you can get interested, you can think about things and think about what's going to happen. And a lot of it is about pausing and allowing yourself this pre-planning time. And so with a lot of my clients, what I always say is pick a time when you're going to do this for tomorrow, and for the week ahead. And it really works. It's literally, I would say for myself, changed my life. Often people with ADHD don't do this pre-imagining. They don't do this mental dress rehearsal. So when your kid is going upstairs to get their socks and their sports equipment or whatever, one of the things you can ask them is, what will it look like? So what will it look like when you go upstairs? What will you do? What will it feel like? And you can sort of prompt them to start to do this mental dress rehearsal. Or you can even say, let's do this together. Let's do this visualization. When people in sports and stuff talk about visualization, this is what they're talking about. And it's pretty fabulous. It can really help you with that problem that Barkley highlights, which is the future thinking. So one of the things that I think as a person with ADHD running a house is that we have these aspects that cause chaos, right? We have these things that cause us to have constant problems. You know, we have these areas of chaos, like the picture of my client's front hall that I mentioned, or areas of the day even that cause chaos. And so something I've been using for a long time, and I use it in my own life, is over the week, what household situations cause the most chaos and cause the most stress, and just to make a list. And, you know, if you change just that one aspect, what would happen for your entire household? So I'll give you a personal example. I order groceries, they get delivered, because groceries are something that get left off and people don't go, and I don't go, or somebody doesn't get there, or we miss the wrong things. And that way it causes all kinds of a ripple effect, right? It's like this domino effect that continues to flow. So the idea here is that you look at the situations. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, my morning routine with my child is the thing that causes the biggest stressors in our house. Well, here's the thing. We can only control ourselves, but when you're having conversations, when you're looking at what we can work on for this fall, maybe you work on or look at those aspects and ask your child, what does it feel like for them? You know, what is it stressful for them? Because often it is not something that they have paused and thought about, or they think it's just fine. So as much as you can keep your cool and just say, you know, what do they feel about it, and kind of hear from them, and also go with a collaborative tone. I would love to work on this. This really affects me. So this sheet is just the idea of trying to figure out what causes the chaos, what are the juggernauts, what cause big stressors, and what are the things we can work on that would have a positive impact on our household. You know, is it shouting too much? Is it, you know, nobody really gets up on time? Whatever it is, just jot it down, and that way you kind of have a very clear picture of it, and then you can work collaboratively together and get whatever supports you need, because we need supports for sure, and need somebody to help us out. And I think there's no shame in that. The more services and supports you can get, the better. So I know that there are many, many, many of you on the line today, and I would be more than happy to take questions now, Trish.
Okay, thank you. All right, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the question box. Michelle, I did see some comments from you, but I'm not clear. So if you could just rephrase it into a question, that would be really helpful. Okay, Sarah asks, so when the kids are flying around and not yet calm, what is the best way to handle all the spills and messes?
Well, I guess one of the things I'd sort of track back on is, you know, what's happening that's making them fly around and not calm, and what can we do to create sort of space for them to have too much energy and get their energy out. And then what are the household rules and sort of boundaries we need to set so that there are less spills and messes. And by that I don't mean having some pristine home. I mean, you know, maybe it's that they have to bike to school, right? And by biking to school or biking home, they get their energy out, or having an hour of playtime, and that way there's a little less of that nighttime chaos. I think the best way is also to teach self-regulation. There's a wonderful program. I mean, there's a lot about this in my book, and Why Will No One Play With Me, in terms of teaching self-regulation, because definitely affects social skills. But there's also a wonderful program called Zones of Regulation, and it color codes every aspect of your self-regulation and all the states that you can be in. And they use it a lot in schools, and you can, you know, work on that with your child. You can do the lessons in Why Don't No One Play With Me, and that way they will learn to have, you know, to boss their body, to pause, to pay attention, and that will have a greater impact. But I think the other thing is, what are the systemic things that happen that cause those spills and messes? Because I think that's going to be the biggest thing that brings you relief. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Craig asks, what about split households with different rule sets and expectations?
Oh, great questions. So when there are different rule sets, obviously I would love it if parents could get on the same page. And it might be that you're co-parenting, but you don't live together anymore. And I cannot say enough about family therapy and other practitioners to help you get on the same page, and even including, step parents and other people involved in the child's care. Because when we're not on the same page, first of all, these kids are super bright, so they're going to take advantage of that. And then secondly, we're asking somebody who might be less mature, might not have the best self-management system, to go between two polar sets of rules. Now, I can feel some of you who say, I would love that, but my ex won't do it, etc. I've dealt with that a lot. One of the things we try to do, if it's appropriate and if the child is able to have this conversation, is to talk about how sometimes there are different rules in different places and we have to adjust, and to really have the conversation about what are the expectations and what are the expectations at the other house, and to try to have them sort of recognize the difference and the expectations and what they need to do. But my ideal is that we get on the same page and even make some concessions. I don't love X, but I'm willing to do it. And I've seen that happen with families over time, and I've seen it happen with really good support and help. But I do know that there are families where it can't happen, and in that case, we're doing the best we can. And I really think that also having some kind of transition plan between houses is going to benefit you, so that the child has that space and time to transition. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Michelle asks, is there a difference in the dress rehearsal if the child is on or off medication?
That's a really interesting question. I have not seen that studied extensively in research, but what I would say is that if you are on medication and it is helping your working memory and your memory, then you're going to see an increased ability to pause, an increased ability to remember, and increased ability for future thinking. So I'm not saying whether you should be on medication or shouldn't be, or whether it's good or bad. What I'm saying is it does affect the elements that go into this future thinking. So my guess would be that the future thinking will happen more easily, in my experiences, when the child is able to, be more centered, whatever that might be. And if your child isn't taking medication, maybe it's that you have like some yoga or some mindfulness or some pausing or some calming down or some reading some books before we go into planning all this stuff. Because the more we can be aware, the more we can do this planning. That's a good question.
Thank you. The next question is from Maria. She asks, how is mimetic ideational and CBT different?
So cognitive behavioral therapy is just, in a really high level nutshell, targeting behaviors and working on them. Mimetic, so it's different. Mimetic ideational information processing is the information processing system in your brain that allows you to do this future thinking, and it calls upon all different parts of the brain and all different functions. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy is something, that you go and you attend and you take up this therapy, and mimetic ideational information processing is something that we as human beings are able to do. We have this extra set of challenges associated with it, and that's why many people don't do it, but it is about your brain.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle asks, or states, I can't get my son to put on his socks at all because he spins the socks in the air. So do you have any recommendations to help her?
That's a great spin on my sock thing. I would say that is a self-regulation issue, right? So if you are dealing with a kid who's spinning the socks or spinning his body, or is obsessively putting Legos together, those are all those challenges all go back to self-regulation. So I have a couple recommendations. One, there is a phenomenal book that I personally believe every person with ADHD should and would want to read, called Self-Reg by Dr. Stuart Shanker. And it is all about self-regulation. Self-regulation is about the levels of activation in your brain going up, right? So when he's spinning his socks, he's very activated, he's very aroused. And one of the things we have to remember is that the ADHD brain, everyone thinks we're hyper, and so we're over aroused. It's actually not true. We're under aroused. We don't have the chemicals that we need, and so we seek stimulation. So my first question, right, before we go into teaching your son self-regulation is, what does that do for him? Like, does he like it? Is he interested in it? Is it fun for him? Is he doing it to sort of push your buttons? I would love to ask him that question, because, he might just be doing it unconsciously, and then you'll find that out. He might also be doing it to push your buttons, or because it's fun. He thinks it's really fun. So I think that's A. And then B is that this is a self-regulation issue. So what I want to do is go down on the floor with him, ask him to look me in the eye and pause and ask him what's going on for him and what we can do to bring his sort of inner elevator down, and what we can do to make him less excited. Because he's not attending and listening, is my guess, and he's really kind of into his little spinning socks. And that sort of ability to bring him down and be a little more mindful in the moment is one of the ways to deal with this. There's others, but just to give a high level answer, it's one of the ways.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Sujata, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. What if everybody sleeps late and everybody has to get up and there's a huge rush in the morning?
Yes. Oh, I hear this a lot. I'm one of these crazy people who gets up so early but goes to bed at senior citizen hour. So this is something a lot of my clients, a lot of families I know work on and have this issue. And I think the big question is, if we want to put the oxygen mask on first as parents, what is going on for you sleep-wise? Because if you can get up on time, then you can facilitate everybody else's sleep and everybody else getting up on time. And obviously, this is not an easy journey, but I think the biggest thing I would say is what's going on for the parents. Maybe you have your own sleep issues, and what can we do to get you help and to get you in a better pattern? And a lot of sleep issues for ADHDers, we need actual help, right? We need to go to a physician, we need to get some assistance. Because if you can get up more on time, then you can facilitate everyone else. I'm also a huge believer in that when you look at sort of the ripple effect of things, which obviously you are, we want to go back to the night before, right? And look back at what happens at night that keeps the kids and you and everyone up. What is the sort of chain of events? And then how does it affect you getting up later in the morning? Because my bet is that if you were just struggling with sleep as a parent and the kids were going to bed on time, they would get up. They might not be doing productive things, but they would be up in their rooms playing or whatever. So what happens in a lot of households with ADHD is that the nighttime and the afternoon and a series of events is leading to these mornings of chaos. So I would in addition to sleep and looking at your own sleep, I would look at what are the big things that could be changed. And I'm a big fan, by the way, of working on one thing at a time. Maybe this fall you're working on sleep, then you work on something else. Because what happens is we tend to work on so many things and then nothing changes. Whereas if you pay attention to this one or two aspects, it's going to actually have a huge impact and you're going to be able to develop new habits. But it's such a common issue, and I'm completely empathetic.
Thank you. Tiffany asks, how frequently should I be coaching my child with mind mimes? Daily? Question. Or is with the goal of her operating with mind mime on her own?
The goal is obviously always that the child develops those life skills so that they can go off into the world and don't need our supports anymore, right? That they're able to do that. But that is a long way off for many of our kids. So I would say yes, you need to be doing them daily. And one of the things that comes up, and there's a technique called collaborative problem solving you may want to check out by Dr. Ross Green, is that many times when you bring up something like this, because it is hard for your child, they resist or they tantrum or they melt down. And so I would say if you're going to do it with them a couple times a day or every day or around homework or something, one of the things we want to do is approach it in a very light touch kind of way. And one of the beautiful things about open questions, which is part of the Why Will No One Play With Me technique, is that you ask, not tell. And you also hear from them what are the things they don't want to do, what are the things they don't like. There's times where kids will say to me, there's 4 words I do not want you to use. If you use them, I'm going to get up and walk away. Now, we as parents can say, you won't, that's ridiculous, you'll do what I say, but then you don't get cooperation. So what I would say is, if you're going to introduce this concept, it's phenomenal. And then also collaborate with them. You know, maybe they don't want to do it when they get right off the bus. Maybe they don't want to do it in certain circumstances. And it's okay, by the way, if they say no to everything, to say, okay, where are you leaving me? Like, you know, you said no to everything. But I think the more we can also hear them, I also am a huge fan, I didn't mention this in presentation, of getting an iPad or an iPhone and filming the actual steps they need to go through so they can feel and experience what it is like. So here's my sock example again. You would, and it's fun, right? You would take an iPhone and you would film them going upstairs, walking down the hall, walking into their bedroom, going to their bureau. Now we're explaining an actual visual process that when you think about going to get your socks, this is what I want you to picture in your head. And with homework, with all these kind of routine-based things, I get kids to do it, parents get kids to do it, and it's kind of fun. It also allows them to sort of step into that image, right? Now you've given them the image of what it looks like, and you've created not just a movie in their mind, but like an actual movie, and that really helps them. So that's just another tip too, that maybe there's a time of day when you're doing this, and maybe there's, you know, an actual sort of little video production you do at first around certain things, like, you know, getting the sports equipment or multi-step things especially. I hope that helps.
Sorry for the pause. I'm unmuting myself. This is an interesting question, and I think that a lot of people probably have this situation if they're an adult with ADHD and parenting their children. From Oscar, he asks, or he states, I'm having an increasingly hard time helping my mother to not try to micromanage every aspect of my life. We have a great relationship, but she's set in her ways, and in turn, I eventually take her advice, then see a negative consequence because I did not follow my intuition. So, what steps can Oscar take?
Well, and I think this is actually great advice for a great situation to talk about for lots of us, which is that, you know, I always say this, I don't think those of us who parent a child with ADHD set out to be controlling or are by nature controlling. I think what happens is we have a kid who's 3 to 5 years less mature. We've shown this in brain science. And we have to step in. You know, I went to back to school night the other day, and I was looking around and they were giving this presentation as if every kid is going to their locker and every kid is getting their stuff and every kid is managing moving from class to class. And I was thinking, how many parents in this room have a kid with ADHD and are thinking, oh my God, that's not happening, right? They're not coming home with their stuff, and it's, day 4. So I think one of the things that occurs is that as parents, we are more involved than we'd like to be because we have to be more involved. So the first thing I'd say is, I don't know how old you are, Oscar, but I would say that there comes a point where we have to have a discussion about that, and the fact that you want to self-manage, and that all this advice, whatever it does to one, maybe it causes you to push pull, maybe it causes you to become very reactive, maybe it causes you to even not do things are good for you. And I go through this a lot with college students and young people that I work with, where at some point we have to allow them to try, because otherwise you're going to be parenting them for forever in a really intense way. So I would first and foremost have that discussion. And if you're listening to this and your child has been trying to have that discussion with you, understand that they may not always have the skills, but we do have to find some compromises. The other thing I would say is that sometimes we do need to take back ourselves and not be micromanaged and make choices. And if you yourself are getting help and managing better, and maybe getting coaching for executive function so you can manage your life, then that's the other conversation to have. It's like, I am actually doing this and I am getting the skills, and I am not 12 years old anymore, and I need to be able to do this. But it is a very common scenario, and I know how it evolves, and I also know that at some point we have to create some distance. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Joshua asks, how do you teach a 7-year-old executive functioning skills?
Okay, I'm going to give a high-level answer because this is like a whole webinar in and of itself, but it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. There are other webinars here at CHAD, and other information out there if you Google me. But basically, executive function skills are always taught best when they are integrated into our real daily lives. So many of you have gone to back to school, and school systems tell you that they have an executive function course where the kids don't use any of their real work. That's actually not research-wise how executive function is learned best. Executive function is learned best when we break things down into small pieces and create systems and strategies that allow us to predict the future, to prioritize, to organize. And we first teach it to someone, and then over time, we pull back little by little, and we allow them to demonstrate the skill. So I'll just give an example that maybe will help parents. When I work with a student and they first walk in my door, and it's September, I have them take out their backpack, and we organize it together, and we go through all the crinkled papers, and we go online and we check the portal, and we see what their grades are and what they've turned in and what they haven't. And then by the 3rd or 4th or 5th session with me, depending, when they walk in, I'll say, what do we usually do? And they'll tell me, and I'll just sit back and I'll say, you do it now. And I'll guide them. I'm a shepherd, right? I'm guiding them. I'm asking them questions. And I'm, sometimes saying, no, wait, don't just throw that away. Let's look what it is. But the idea is that they will eventually take it over. Now, it is difficult to get kids to check the portal and sit down and do all this stuff. I'm not delusional. I am there on the front lines myself. But I think that that's part of what needs to happen. And all of the information you're getting from CHAD and from other aspects are to help you find ways to get the child incentivized and motivated to actually do that. But the more it's ritual based, first snack, then this, then that, the more you're going to get them to do it, because it's going to become a habit. So it's really about teaching the skill and then pulling back little by little and having them demonstrate the skill kind of in front of you. Instead of doing it and jumping in, what do we do here? What have we done in the past? If you think about anything you've learned, golf, swimming, eventually you're actually performing after someone has shown you how.
Thank you. Okay. Brandon asks, we have 9-year-old twins. They feed off each other. How do you control 2 children at the same time? We split them up a couple of days a week. I'll bring one to work with me once a week, and we homeschool. There is no self-regulation in either of them. My wife, their mom, is overwhelmed most of the time.
So I'm completely hearing the challenge there. And what I would say is that this is where you will want to spend time. And since you're homeschooling, you're used to coaching and working with your children. And I would suggest that you spend time teaching them self-regulation. If you go when Why Will No One Play With Me comes out, there's a whole lesson track about self-regulation that is written for parents. It's easy to follow, and you can actually teach them self-regulation. I would separate them if lessons together just deteriorates and falls apart. Maybe grandparents can help someone else to sort of ease that burden. But I definitely think that having them learn those self-regulation skills is going to allow them to be better students and to actually have the household be more calm. And then I also always recommend that when kids are sort of, a whirling dervish and you're experiencing that, which it sounds like your wife is, to figure out ways that ignite their brain, right? Our brain is under aroused, which means we need things to stimulate us, which we can do good stimulation or bad stimulation, right? And so what is it that interests them? What is it that they like to do? What is it that can be folded into their day so that they are getting their, not only just energy out, but they're getting that stimulation? Because remember, when we are bored, we often act out. I will even admit to you that I went on a fishing trip about 3 weeks ago, and I was so bored and I became really cranky. And I heard myself become cranky, and it was that I was bored. And my boredom resulted in like literal physical symptoms because of my ADHD. So I'm not accusing them of being bored of school, but we do want to find out what goes on for them, and what do they feel, and what can we build into their day. And what can we make that's very routine based so that they know what the expectations are, and we can be guiding them to meet those expectations, because that's always the goal, right? We're trying to teach them to be able to meet society's expectations. But I would definitely invest in self-regulation work because I think it's going to really pay off.
Thank you. Okay, we don't have a lot of questions left, so I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to type in your last minute questions if you have any. And while you're doing that, if you do have any, I'm going to read a statement from one of our parents, or a suggestion that has worked for her. And then if that will be the last for today, if that's the last comment for today, then we'll just wrap things up. So Melissa says, I've found that using whiteboards in the child's room helps them to communicate with you without having a conversation, especially with to-do list items, and there can be a written conversation. When the mom is ready to have a conversation, the child or teen might not be in a receptive mood.
I think that that's absolutely brilliant. And I think what it goes back to, by the way, is that we have to respect that little people and big people and teenagers have opinions of their own and feelings of their own. And so one of the ways to foster collaboration is to hear from them what they want. A lot of kids come in my office and tell me, I will do this, but I don't want to walk through the door and have everybody pounce on me. I don't want people to have pieces of paper printed out when I walk through the door off the bus, which may be horrific for them socially, right? And they're like, you didn't turn in this or that. So I think that the whiteboard is just an example of this idea of asking the child, no matter what age they are, what will work for them. And by the way, if they say nothing and they eschew everything, then you go back to problem solving skills. Okay, well, you've said no to everything, so we can't say no to everything. So I want you to pick some things because we can't say no to everything, right? But a lot of times those kind of simple things, like I said, 4 words they don't want you to say, I don't want to talk about this. It's not that we're going to forgive it forever, but it's that we're giving them space so that they can give us back cooperation.
Thank you. All right, one last question for today. How do you detach a 9-year-old from the iPad? He is very stimulated forever, gets very mad, even when you give him a countdown.
Yeah, I'm all for limiting electronics, especially during the week and especially when you need kids to be their best selves. I think what happens is that they get very attached and they often, the more they're on the device, the more we see sort of negative behaviors. It's like they've kind of departed from their best self. So I think one of the things I would suggest is to create some limits on technology. And one of the biggest limits I always suggest is not to allow technology when you know you're going to need them to shift. In the morning when you're going to need them to shift and get on the school bus. If they're coming home for half an hour, they're eating a snack, and then you need to go back out to karate. If they get on the iPad, you're now needing to tear them away from something that really stimulates their brain. I also am a huge fan of talking about the way they react in not an accusatory way, but just like, I hear you saying these things and acting this way, and it makes me feel X, Y, and Z, and I would like us to change this. But a lot of times with maturity, they don't realize, how they're behaving. So my advice is to set some limits and then also set some rewards, right? So a reward can not just be, oh, here's, you only did the iPad for 30 minutes. A reward-based system could be based on how you act when you're transitioning off the iPad and how you treat other people and what you say. And it could be based on sort of like really clear expectations of what you want to see, that the iPad is shut off, that there's no screaming, no yelling, no begging, all those things. And then what's the incentive? Some ADHD kids do really well with incentive-based systems. Some do terribly, or aren't interested at all. But if they are into it, they are into it, and it works really well. But you have to set really, really clear expectations. I want to see this, because otherwise it becomes this haranguing debate back and forth. But I would definitely also check out anything Chad has about technology. There's a lot of information out there because I'm giving you a really high level answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering all of these questions, and thank you everybody for all of your great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for today. For all of you that have attended, again, you will receive the recording and the handouts tomorrow. And thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, Caroline.
No problem.
All right, thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody.